So when we were trying to have a bit of a conversation around how to structure this panel, mine is a bit of the experience that I have acquired through my service to different scientific advisory panels, and when talking today through this theme of the landscape level approach to manage the threats, but also the conservation of species, I'm drawing from the 5 years that I did service as the scientific technical advisory panel of the Global Environment Facility, one of the several panels I had the pleasure to work and serve in terms of the interface between science and policy. So for some who might not be familiar, the Global Environment Facility is a multi-trust fund that has the support of the World Bank and many countries, including Australia. And the idea is to develop projects that will deliver global environmental benefits in developing countries, at the same time delivering some socioeconomic benefits to the places or the regions or ecosystems where these projects are implemented. The GEF works on a cycle of funding of 5 years. The last replenishment was around $4.5 billion across different portfolios. One of them is biodiversity, the other is land degradation. I was advising on the portfolio of land degradation and other, what we call some projects do tackle more than one issue at a time. So sometimes mine was crossing land with biodiversity. And there are others around sustainable food system, urban cities, and integrated water management. So through that, I think for the 5 years that I was looking into the projects, usually the question came as to what are the outcomes, what you are going to deliver, and how in these many challenging places where the projects were going to be implemented by the likes of IUCN, WWF. So the GEF works in partnership with other UN agencies, but also with organizations like IUCN, WWF, Conservation International. So some of the problems are common in terms of ensuring that once you implement this project, there is a durability or there is a sustainability of the outcomes beyond the lifetime of the projects. And in thinking of today's interventions, I kept going back to what we as a panel many times were advising the people that were writing the projects, but also those that were in charge of implementation. And that was to take, at least for the land and biodiversity, a system thinking approach. And this is not different. I heard this morning when I arrived, and even through the many interventions here, is about what you want to improve, but also how that impacts on the surrounding areas. So that idea of system thinking approach was guiding many of the feedback or the advice that we would provide. And then how, say, apply to biodiversity, how you could design for conservation activities that require that first you understand the interconnection. So systems, you understand the element or you understand your species, but also you need to understand the interconnections in between some of the threats. I was saying to Andy and my fellows when we were having a bit of a chat prior to this panel that the idea of having that understanding of the drivers, pressure, the state, the impact, then the responses is essential, because if you don't tackle the drivers, sometimes you go for short-term solutions that are focused on the pressures, but the drivers is that things that you need to tackle, and sometimes the drivers are the ones that take more time to revert or to shift the dial, but at the same time, drivers many times can be common to more than one species, and therefore that's the benefit of having this landscape approach to threats. So the projects would map the ecological, the social, and economic systems to identify how threats like, for instance, deforestation or poaching can ripple across a landscape. And in that regard, for instance, I remember a project that we assessed and we delivered in the Amazon Sustainable Landscape Programs that was focused on deforestation and was linked to agriculture, to the building of infrastructure, and to issues around land tenure. So today we spoke about traditional knowledge, traditional owners. In many countries around the world, the land tenure and access to land is another big issue to ensure that those that live in the landscape do benefit from the action, but also have access to land to implement some of those actions. Multi-stakeholder engagement has been said over and over and over again. It, for us, was important, but thinking also from this, the interventions that also bring to the table the right people at the right time, and that means not only the consultation for the sake of consultation, but really having people on the ground that would take ownership of the activities, but also working with the governments and the communities and the private sector. More and more, the GEF is tackling the partnership with the public-private partnerships, because they are essential to work and to deliver the scale that some of the projects need, or to scale up some of the pilots, to scale them up and be able then to deliver more at national level, for instance. The integrated threat management. So what it was said before, you might have one species, but the same threats for multiple species. So how the policy, how the actions could at the same time, with meager resources, because more and more we have less financial resources to implement projects. So how can you think from the very beginning, the design phase, that if you are going to put an action in place that will drive, or that will address multiple threats for multiple species. And in this, for instance, in Cabo Verde, there was a project on land restoration that was looking into land degradation, invasive species, and climate change. And the idea was to look at all these threats at once, and how then the actions could speak to these different threats. The other aspect is the landscape level planning. So thinking of, sometimes you work in a sub-catchment or in a catchment area, but that one usually is part of a larger ecosystem. And so how can you have the idea of the entire ecosystem, at least on the design phase, even if you then prioritize a sub-catchment or a catchment area, but having the understanding of how you work on the upper, the middle, or the low catchment area might have an impact in all the other connected landscapes. The feedback loops and the adaptive management that was said today prior to lunch in the session I was sitting is how you need to learn. And sometimes we speak about data deficiency and so much data that we need, but then there is a balance in between how much is enough for you to keep actioning and to keep doing things and not get paralyzed because of data deficiency. And that's an example in a project so in the Bahamas, where we're working on land degradation neutrality with real-time data on land degradation to inform adaptive land use decisions and policy update. Then the aspect of policy and institutions included into the design phase. So how some of the conservation strategies, we always would advise people do a rapid appraisal to understand where there is policy coherence or incoherence. In some of the, you have a goal. What are the existing policies that speak to that goal? What are the policies that might be not aligned or misaligned? And then what new policies through the project might need to be delivered, or which one of the current policies could be informed and adapted so that at the end of the day, conservation is more successful. I think this is the nutshell of how we were proceeding with the GEF. And I guess, Andy, my 4 points of the recommendations that we learn is the import, or we advise, is the importance on diagnosing and mapping the drivers and pressures, how to use then the spatial components, how to ask the right questions. So if you have a limited budget, then as you were saying, Jessica, is what are the areas that you're going to prioritize, how you decide over so many millions of hectares, which ones are the ones that are the ones number 1, 2, and 3. And we have the tools to do that these days. So we have AI, as we saw this morning, and we have many geospatial tools that are common common use in the private sector as well as in government these days. The system thinking approach would be the second one, and also thinking from an ecosystem, from a socio-ecological perspective, not only what you can deliver in terms of nature, but also what can you deliver in terms of financial or economics or social benefits for the people that live in that landscape. The strengthening of the governance and the institutional capacity, and the concept of adaptive management that was said over many presentations this morning, and how then it's important to have these feedback loops to keep improving and learning by doing, again, as a concept that I hear this morning. Thank you, Andy. That's my little advice.